Let me make sure I'm ready for this video real quick. Got my notes, check. Pepsi, check. Sunglasses, check. Hat, check. And yes, thick skin, check. Let's go. Welcome to Golden Bluted, everybody. If you are a college football fan, please go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button because that's all we do here. Videos every single day. And when you get a chance, go check out our Patreon page. We have a lot of great perks over there. We call our Patreons the shot callers because they call the shots around here. Remember, $5 and up Patreons will get to decide the game that we're going to live stream in the regular season, and you'll get to watch with me, Golden Bluted. And our score prediction contest will be coming back. Every week I'll pick out a game, and my Patreons will pick the score, and whoever comes close to the score wins $20. And you can win as many times as you want. Yeah, I still can't find my regular sunglasses, so I'm still using these ridiculously looking sunglasses. If I can't find my regular sunglasses by the end of the day, I'm just going to have to go out and buy some. But on this video, I'm going to talk about the ACC. They are getting rid of divisions starting this year, and they're going for the 3-5-5, meaning every team is going to have 3 primary opponents, and then they're going to rotate the other team. 5 this year, the other 5 the next year, and rotating so on and so forth. And whenever I see the 3 primary opponents, to me it looks like they rushed this. It was not well thought out at all. Now some of these make sense, but most of these do not make sense at all. So let's look at the primary opponents for each team in the ACC. First, we'll start with Boston College. You get the Miami Hurricanes, they get Pitt, and they get Syracuse. To me, this makes sense. They're all former Big East rivals. I know Miami is a long trip for Boston College. They're used to playing Miami. They played them in the Big East. I like this. It makes sense. Next up is Clemson. Their 3 primary opponents are Florida State, Georgia Tech, and NC State. I think this makes sense as well. Clemson is used to playing all 3 of these teams every single year, and for the most part, they've been pretty good games. I like this. This actually makes sense. For Duke, their 3 primary opponents, North Carolina, NC State, and Wake Forest. This makes absolutely perfect sense. All 3 of their primary opponents are North Carolina schools. I like that they get to play all 3 North Carolina schools every year. This makes perfect sense. Well done, ACC. Next up is Florida State. Their 3 primary opponents, Clemson, Miami Hurricanes, and Syracuse. And this is the toughest primary opponents out of all of them. And I do think Clemson and Miami make sense, but Syracuse, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I know they play them every year, but that is a long trip. There's no real history there. You could have come up with something better than Syracuse for that 3rd opponent. Now for Georgia Tech, Clemson, Louisville, and Wake Forest. For Georgia Tech, the only thing that makes sense is Clemson. Louisville and Wake Forest makes no sense at all. There's a lot more better options than those 2 teams. This makes no sense. Why did you do this, ACC? Now for Louisville, their 3 primary opponents, Georgia Tech, Miami Hurricanes, and Virginia. This makes absolutely no sense. None of it. Georgia Tech, what? Miami Hurricanes? I mean, maybe a little bit, but not really. And then Virginia? No, that doesn't make sense either. ACC, you completely botched it when it comes to Louisville. This makes no sense. Now for the Miami Hurricanes, their 3 primary opponents, Boston College, Florida State, and Louisville. Now, of course, Florida State makes perfect sense. Boston College, I guess it makes sense because they are former Big East rivals. But then Louisville, that's the one that you dropped the ball on. You could have done better with the Miami Hurricanes. For North Carolina, there are 3 primary opponents, Duke, NC State, and Virginia. This makes sense. The only thing that would have made more sense is swapping Virginia and Wake Forest. But I'm okay with this. For NC State, there are 3 primary opponents, Clemson, Duke, and North Carolina. For NC State, this makes perfect sense. I wouldn't even swap Clemson for Wake Forest to make all North Carolina. I like that they kept NC State and Clemson playing each other every year. This one makes perfect sense. Well done, ACC. Next you have Pitt. Their 3 primary opponents, Boston College, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech. I think this makes sense. This is probably the best you could have done with Pitt. 3 former Big East rivals. I'm okay with this. Next up is Syracuse. Their 3 primary opponents, Boston College, Florida State, and Pitt. For the most part, it makes sense except for Florida State. And I said it with Florida State. Syracuse didn't make sense with them. And for Syracuse, Florida State doesn't make sense with them. You could have done a little bit better with Syracuse. Next up is Virginia. Their 3 primary opponents, Louisville, North Carolina, and Virginia Tech. For For the most part, it does make sense except for Louisville. Like I said before, you completely botched Louisville. So for Virginia, the only one I don't agree with is Louisville. Could have done better with Virginia. Next up is Virginia Tech. There are three primary opponents: Pitt, Virginia, and Wake Forest. Now, Pitt and Virginia makes perfect sense, but Wake Forest, how did you come up with that? That didn't make any sense at all. But with Pitt and Virginia, that does make sense. And finally, Wake Forest. Their three primary opponents: Duke, Georgia Tech, and Virginia Tech. Now, this is the easiest three primary opponents out of all of them. And except for Duke, this doesn't make any sense. Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech, how did you come up with that? What was your logic? So this one doesn't make any sense except for Duke. So as you can see, it looks like they rushed into this. A lot of these, it looks like they just drew names. Now there's a few of them that made sense, but overall this does not look good at all. Now what I'll say is in the future, Notre Dame and West Virginia will be joining the ACC, so they will get a second chance at this. Do not botch the second chance. I'm not sure if they're going to stick with the 3-5-5 or if they're going to go with another combination. But if you do stick with the 3-5-5, you got to do better than this. I know there's maybe one or two teams that you're not probably going to be able to figure out as far as making perfect sense, but you can definitely do better than this. The teams that make sense: Boston College, Clemson, North Carolina, NC State. 4 teams that make sense. And only 2 teams make perfect sense, and that's Duke and NC State. So a total of 6 teams between the makes sense and the perfect sense, meaning you only got it right with 6 teams. That's not good. Then the teams that made absolutely no sense was Louisville and Wake Forest. And for Georgia Tech, only Clemson made sense. For Miami Hurricanes, only Florida State made sense. For Syracuse, Florida State didn't make sense. For Virginia, Louisville didn't make sense. For Virginia Tech, Wake Forest didn't make sense. So this was definitely all over the place. Go back to the drawing board, ACC, and do better. This was a mess. It was all over the place. And you know me by now. I don't criticize unless I offer a solution. So here's my solution to this problem. For Boston College, I would keep Miami, Pitt, and Syracuse as their primary opponents. For Clemson, I would keep Florida State, Georgia Tech, and NC State for primary opponents. For Duke, I would keep North Carolina, NC State, and Wake Forest as primary opponents. For North Carolina, I would keep Duke, NC State, and Virginia as primary opponents. For NC State, I would keep Clemson, Duke, and North Carolina as primary opponents. And for Pitt, I would keep Boston College, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech as primary opponents. These are the teams that I would change. For Florida State, I would keep Clemson and Miami, but I would get rid of Syracuse and bring in Louisville. So their primary opponents would be Clemson, Miami, and Louisville. I think that makes way more sense. For Georgia Tech, I would keep Clemson and Wake Forest. I know that's iffy, but then I would get rid of Louisville and bring in Virginia. So for Georgia Tech, Clemson, Wake Forest, and Virginia would be primary opponents. Those were the 3 that I could make the most sense for Georgia Tech. They were difficult. For Louisville, I got rid of Georgia Tech, Miami, and Virginia. All 3, none of them made sense. And I put in Florida State, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. So for Louisville, I have Florida State, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. That made the most sense for me for Louisville. For Miami, I kept Florida State and Boston College. I got rid of Louisville. That didn't make any sense. And I put in Virginia Tech. Of course, Virginia Tech. Duh. So for Miami, I have Florida State, Boston College, and Virginia Tech as their primary opponents. For Syracuse, I kept Boston College and Pitt, got rid of Florida State, and put in Louisville. So for Syracuse, I have Boston College, Pitt, and Louisville as primary opponents. That makes perfect sense to me. For Virginia, I kept North Carolina and Virginia Tech, got rid of Louisville, and brought in Georgia Tech. So for Virginia, I had North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and Georgia Tech as their primary opponents. That made the most sense for Virginia. Now for Virginia Tech, I kept Pitt and Virginia, got rid of Wake Forest, and brought in the Hurricanes. Of course, that's a no-brainer. So for Virginia Tech, I had Pitt, Virginia, and Miami as their primary opponents. And then finally for Wake Forest, I kept Duke and Georgia Tech, but I got rid of Virginia Tech and brought in Louisville. So for Wake Forest, I have Duke, Georgia Tech, and Louisville as their primary opponents. That's what made the most sense for me. So overall, this makes more sense to me than what the ACC has in place right now. So y'all let me know in the comment section, am I off? Does this actually make sense to you more than when I'm describing it? If so, let me know in the comment section. But if you agree with me, how would you do it? Or would you prefer the teams that I picked? There's also that choice. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.